The 17-year-old girl sitting nervously in Whitney Houston's private studio had no idea that the next 45 minutes would give her the voice that would rule the world for the next 25 years. What happened in that small Houston recording studio on an October afternoon in 1998 didn't just change one young singer's life, it shaped the sound of modern R&B forever. But before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because we're about to reveal the secret vocal technique that Whitney Houston taught a teenage Beyoncé Knowles and how that lesson became the foundation of everything Queen Bee would accomplish. It was October 15th, 1998, and Sugar Hill Recording Studios in Houston, Texas was buzzing with quiet energy. Whitney Houston, at age 35, was at the absolute peak of her powers. My Love Is Your Love was climbing the charts, proving that the voice was back and stronger than ever. Down the hall, Matthew Knowles was desperately trying to get his daughter's group, Destiny's Child, to the next level. The group had talent and local success in Houston, but breaking into the national market felt impossible. 17-year-old Beyoncé Knowles had raw talent that made industry veterans stop in their tracks. But something crucial was missing: the emotional depth and vocal control that could carry a career for decades. That's when Matthew made the call that would change music history. He'd met Whitney through industry connections, and when he asked if she'd listen to his daughter sing, Whitney said yes. "Bring her by the studio tomorrow around 4 p.m., Whitney had said simply, "but I only have about an hour." But what Whitney heard when Beyoncé first opened her mouth changed everything she thought she knew about vocal mentorship and the responsibility that came with recognizing true talent. When Beyoncé walked into Studio B that October afternoon, she was shaking from nervousness. Her palms were sweating, and she kept running them against her jeans to dry them. This was Whitney Houston, the voice, the woman who had redefined what a ballad could be. Whitney looked up from the mixing board to see a tall, beautiful teenager with wide eyes and an expression that reminded Whitney of herself at that age. Hungry, determined, but terrified of not measuring up. There was something special about this girl's presence, even before she sang a single note. "So you're the young lady I've been hearing about," Whitney said, her voice warm but evaluating. "Matthew tells me you can sing. Let's hear what you've got, baby girl." Beyoncé launched into Vision of Love by Mariah Carey, a bold choice. Her voice soared through the runs, hit the high notes cleanly, and demonstrated impressive technical skill. But Whitney stopped her after just 30 seconds. "Hold up! Hold up!" Whitney said, her voice carrying no malice but plenty of instruction. "Child, you're singing from your throat." Beyoncé looked confused and more than a little hurt. She just delivered what she thought was a flawless performance of one of the most challenging songs in the contemporary R&B catalog. Her runs had been clean, her pitch had been perfect, and she'd hit notes that most singers couldn't even attempt. Whitney saw the confusion and hurt in the young woman's eyes and immediately softened her approach. She stood up from the mixing board, a movement that seemed almost ceremonial, and walked over to where Beyoncé stood frozen near the microphone. "Listen to me carefully, baby girl," Whitney said, placing a gentle but firm hand on Beyoncé's shoulder. "You've got incredible natural ability. I mean incredible. Most people spend years trying to learn runs like the ones you just did naturally. Your pitch is nearly perfect, your tone is beautiful, and your range is honestly impressive as hell." Beyoncé felt a flutter of hope, but Whitney wasn't finished. "But here's what I need you to understand," Whitney continued, her voice becoming more intense. "Talent isn't enough. Raw ability isn't enough. You're working way too hard up here," she said, pointing to her throat. "You're forcing it, pushing it, making your vocal cords do all the work when they should just be the final step in a much bigger process. Your throat is where the sound comes out, but it's not where the power should come from." She moved her hand to Beyoncé's diaphragm, pressing gently but firmly. "This is your engine, not your throat. This is where the real power lives, and the control you're looking for. That comes from learning to use this properly." Then Whitney did something that surprised both Beyoncé and Matthew, who was watching from the corner. She moved her hand to rest over Beyoncé's heart. "But even more important than technique is this. The real power, the thing that separates good singers from great artists, comes from in here, from your connection to the song, to the emotion, to something bigger than yourself." That's when Whitney taught her the technique that would become Beyoncé's secret weapon for the next 25 years. A technique that would shape everything from Crazy in Love to Halo to Formation. I want you to think of your breathing in three layers, Whitney began, her voice taking on the tone of a master craftsman sharing closely guarded trade secrets. Most people breathe from their chest. That's shallow breathing, and it'll wear out your voice in minutes on stage. You'll be hoarse by the third song, and you'll never have the power you need for those big moments. She demonstrated taking a deliberately shallow chest breath that made her shoulders rise dramatically. See how my whole upper body is moving? That's working against me, not with me. All that tension goes straight to my throat. Now watch this. Whitney placed one hand on her chest and another on her diaphragm, then took a deep, controlled breath that seemed to fill her entire torso from the bottom up. Her shoulders stayed perfectly level, but her midsection expanded like a balloon being slowly inflated. That's diaphragmatic breathing. That's layer two. Feel how stable my upper body stays? All the work is happening down here, where I've got real muscle support. This is what gives you the power to sustain those long notes without strain, what lets you sing for hours without losing your voice. Beyoncé watched, mesmerized, as Whitney demonstrated the breathing pattern several more times, each breath controlled and purposeful. But here's what most vocal coaches don't teach because they either don't understand it themselves or they think it's too abstract for their students. There's a third layer that's even more important than the physical technique. Beyoncé leaned in, captivated by every word. The third layer is spiritual. When you sing, really sing, you're not just pushing air through your vocal cords to make pretty sounds. You're channeling something bigger than yourself. Emotion, truth, pain, joy, the divine, whatever you want to call it. But you can't access that third layer if you're strangling your voice with tension and forcing every note. Whitney had Beyoncé place her hands on her own diaphragm and chest, guiding her through the proper breathing technique. Now breathe like you're filling up a balloon in your belly, not your chest. Don't think about your throat at all. Just focus on that expansion down here. Feel that? That's where your real power lives. Whitney placed her own hands over Beyoncé's to help her feel the correct muscle engagement. There you go. Now hold that breath for 5 counts, then release slowly. Control is everything. The breath is your foundation. Everything else builds from here. For the next 20 minutes, Whitney put Beyoncé through breathing exercises that felt more like meditation than vocal training. They worked on posture, releasing tension, and connecting breath to emotion. Your voice is an instrument, but it's also a vessel, Whitney explained. If the vessel is tight and constricted, the music can't flow through it properly. You have to stay open, stay connected to something larger than yourself. But the most powerful moment came when Whitney made Beyoncé promise something that would define her entire career and establish principles she would carry with her for the next quarter century. Now I want you to sing that Mariah song again, Whitney said, her voice carrying both challenge and encouragement. But this time, don't think about hitting the notes perfectly. Don't think about impressing me or your father or anyone else who might be listening. Think about telling a story. Think about making me feel something. Think about what those lyrics actually mean to you, and let that truth flow through the technique we just worked on. Beyoncé nodded, taking a moment to center herself using Whitney's breathing exercises. She closed her eyes, found that connection between her diaphragm and her heart that Whitney had showed her, and began Vision of Love again. But this time, everything was different. The breathing techniques Whitney had just taught her allowed her to sustain notes longer and with more power, but without the strain and tension that had marked her first attempt. Her runs were smoother, more connected to the melody rather than just impressive displays of technical skill. But more importantly, there was an emotional depth that hadn't been there before, a vulnerability and authenticity that transformed the song from a showcase of ability into a genuine artistic statement. Whitney's eyes widened as she listened, and even Matthew, who had heard his daughter sing thousands of times, felt tears forming. The voice coming from this 17-year-old was no longer just technically impressive. It was moving, soulful, connected to something deeper and more profound than mere vocal gymnastics. When Beyoncé finished, the studio was silent for a long, powerful moment. Whitney stood perfectly still, processing what she had just witnessed. Not just the immediate improvement in technique, but the glimpse of the artist this young woman could become with the right guidance and support. "Baby girl," Whitney said softly, her voice carrying more emotion than Beyoncé had expected. "You just sang with your soul, not just your voice. That's the difference between a singer and an artist. What you did the first time was impressive. What you just did was transformative." Tears were forming in Beyoncé's eyes as the full weight of the moment hit her. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly understood what it meant to sing, not just to make pretty sounds that showcased her natural ability, but to communicate, to heal, to transform both herself and her audience through the power of authentic expression. "I want you to promise me something," Whitney continued, her voice taking on a maternal tone that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "Promise me you'll never let the industry change how you sound. They're going to try to make you sing like other people, make you fit into whatever box is selling records this year. They're going to try to take away your individuality and replace it with whatever formula they think will work." She paused, making sure Beyoncé understood the gravity of what she was saying. "But what you just did, that's your voice. That's your gift. That combination of technical ability and emotional truth, that's what's going to make you different from everyone else. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Beyoncé nodded through her tears, understanding that this was about much more than vocal technique. This was about artistic integrity, about staying true to herself in an industry that often demanded compromise and conformity. "I promise," she whispered, and Whitney knew she meant it. Whitney smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed her face from industry professional to caring mentor, and pulled out her phone. "I'm going to give you my personal number," she said, scrolling through her contacts. "When you have questions about technique, when you're struggling with a song, when the industry pressure gets too much and you start doubting yourself, you call me, day or night." That's not just a nice thing to say, that's a promise I'm making to you. The impact of that afternoon was immediate and lasting. Just 3 weeks later, Destiny's Child was back in the studio recording "Say My Name," and everyone involved in the session noticed the dramatic difference in Beyoncé's vocals. The breathing techniques Whitney had taught her allowed her to deliver those complex, intricate runs with effortless precision and power. The emotional connection she'd learned gave weight and meaning to every word, transforming what could have been just another R&B track into something special. But it wasn't just technical improvement. Beyoncé's confidence had been fundamentally transformed. She carried herself differently, sang with more authority, and began to truly step into her role as the group's leader. The other members of Destiny's Child noticed the change immediately, and it elevated everyone's performance. The song became their biggest hit to date, launching them into mainstream success and establishing Beyoncé as one of the most distinctive voices of her generation. And at the foundation of every note, every run, every emotional peak, were the techniques Whitney Houston had taught her in that Houston studio. Years later, when Whitney was struggling with her own demons and battling the personal issues that would eventually overshadow her artistic achievements, Beyoncé would return the favor in a way no one expected. She would call Whitney before every major performance, ostensibly asking for advice, but really reminding her mentor of her own worth and talent. "Miss Whitney," she would say before taking the stage at the Grammy Awards, the Super Bowl, or Madison Square Garden, "I'm still using everything you taught me. Every breath, every note, every moment of connection. It all goes back to that day in Houston. Thank you for giving me my voice." The technique Whitney taught that day can be heard in every Beyoncé performance since. But there's one song where it's most obvious and where Whitney's influence shines brightest. Listen to Halo, specifically the bridge where Beyoncé sustains those powerful, soaring notes that seem to lift the entire song into another dimension. That's pure Whitney Houston technique. The diaphragmatic breathing that provides unwavering support, the emotional connection that gives weight to every word, and the spiritual channeling that turns a good song into a transcendent moment. You can also hear Whitney's influence in Listen from Dreamgirls, where Beyoncé's emotional vulnerability echoes that first lesson about singing from the heart. Even in Formation, those controlled, powerful vocal moments stem from the breathing foundation Whitney established in 1998. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, Beyoncé was devastated. She had lost not just an icon or a professional influence, but a mentor, a spiritual mother who had given her the tools to become everything she was meant to be. The grief was personal and profound. At Whitney's funeral, Beyoncé sang "I Love You" with a depth of emotion that brought the entire congregation to tears. Every note was a testament to that afternoon in Houston, every breath a tribute to the woman who had taught her not just how to sing, but how to be an artist. The performance was both a goodbye and a promise, a commitment to carry forward the lessons and the legacy. Today, Beyoncé is teaching her own daughters the same breathing techniques Whitney taught her. The legacy continues, passed down from one generation to the next. That 45-minute lesson didn't just change Beyoncé's life, it changed popular music. Every time you hear that distinctive Beyoncé power, that emotional depth that sets her apart, you're hearing Whitney Houston's gift, still flowing through the voice of the student who promised never to forget. The secret is out. The technique that made Beyoncé a legend started with Whitney Houston's generosity, wisdom, and recognition that true artistry isn't about perfect pitch. It's about perfect connection between the singer's soul and the song's truth.